Do you think that the stories are sufficient, and how do we deal with the kind of the lexicon and the syntax of this? Because, you know, like when a figure like C.S. Lewis is able to mobilize Christian thought, because for me, at least my take on him, is that he's able to re-engage academics and able to re-engage intellectuals, and he's able indeed to tell stories in a new way. Or Tolkien, who I know you care about and stuff, is able to revivify the imagination of a version of Christianity that starts to feel arcane and not in a good way, that starts to feel like a little encrusted in candelabras and dust. Like, I wonder if you feel that there are new ways to tell this story, or new ways to live this story. Are both of those things important?
Yeah, I think that this is actually a crucial time because, like you said, we're at the end. We're in this meaning crisis where all of a sudden people are noticing that their little life of Netflix and porn is just not enough. And we saw it because we were given it in abundance during COVID, right? It's like, just stay at home and just, revel in your own, desires. And people became crazy. People started losing their minds. And there have been waves of conversions, by the way, like in the Orthodox tradition that I'm part of. So many churches, like my church, has tripled since COVID, and it's happened all over North America, and it's all young men, mostly, that are intellectual, looking for meaning, looking for purpose. And so I think that it's a crucial time right now where there is this possibility of people seeing again what these things are for, right? It's not just about morality. It's not just about, feeling guilty or whatever thing you might think Christianity is about. It is about, finding purpose and being transformed. Now, that's one. In terms of stories, I think it's the same. As I said, as Hollywood is running out of steam, as the culture machine is basically now just turning over the same crap that they've been, putting out for the past 2 generations, there is an opportunity of storytelling to recapture storytelling and to retell even, the fairy tales or these ancient stories, to retell them with a bright voice. And I mean, that's one of the things that I'm doing. For example, I think you probably know that I'm starting to publish these fairy tales again. So I just published Snow White, and I'm going to publish a series of fairy tales that are going back into the tradition with kind of a kind of celebratory tone, right? A joyful tone where we look at the stories and celebrate them. Really, now that there's been cynicism since the 60s, it's like there's actually a possibility of re-celebrating these ancient stories in a way that points towards their meaning. And I think we can do that for a lot of things right now. I think it's actually an opportunity. Right now, there are many opportunities for transformation.
What do you think this is? Meta-modernity? That there will still be the sort of postmodern cynicism, but a new emergent necessity for meaning? What do you think is the original context of a story like Snow White that you have rewritten? And what do you think are the failings of postmodernity? I mean, it's pretty obvious that it's sort of contributed to the crisis of meaning, because it's just taken the bottom out of everything. What is there to galvanize in those kind of in folklore and fairy tales that is is it extraneous to Christianity, or is it within the purview of Christianity? I'm guessing within, given that it's you that's done this, and if so, how so?
Yeah, well, in terms of postmodernity, it's interesting. Like, I do take some aspects of postmodernity quite seriously. I think that postmodernity is useful because, let's say the really modern or the Puritan approach to fairy tales, for example, was horrible, right? It's like, let's take these stories that have a kind of grit to them, that have a kind of a darkness or a messiness to them. Let's make them into simple morality tales. And so we take out all the kind of grungy bit out of the fairy tales. We present them as these very clean stories, but that's not what the fairy tales were. And the postmoderns realized that. And so they just said, let's expose all the grit, or let's expose all the cynicism, all the dark power dynamics, all the sexual stuff in the fairy tales, and let's ignore these Puritan versions. And I think it's both. I think the stories are powerful, beautiful, shining examples of how to be and not to be, but there's also in them a way of exploring some of these darker themes. And so the way that I'm doing these stories, I'm not taking out all the sexual references, like they're there in the story, but I'm also not emphasizing it in a way that is kind of dark and cynical. It's just part of the story. This is the story. And so I think that that's one of the solutions to the postmodern morass, is to be aware of the kind of, let's say, the grittier part, or the slidey part, the sliding part of the stories, and including it in a higher tale, right? To have the margins and the center together, to not just have the center or the margins, but to bring them together in one story. So that's been my approach to the fairy tales.
Cool. When you do that with something like Snow White, I'm guessing that there are sort of functional. No folklore would succeed if it did not have a functionality, I suppose. So, I suppose there are sort of social codes and ethics and things to do with chastity baked into Snow White. The inability of Snow White to evade her own female darkness if she's not willing to voyage into the forest. I'd like to know what them underground miners go down into the unconscious and they mine for jewels. Why 7? I'd like to know that. And the apple has to be given as a gift, and the apple is perhaps the most potent fruit, isn't it? It's something whole. It features in the origin story of our kind and of obviously Christian mythology, and the idea of the poisoned apple, that which looks whole, being toxic, that the dark mother will give you a toxic gift. Tell me how sort of some of that Jungian stuff comes out in your retelling.
I mean, there are a lot of things going on in the story. So in terms of the dwarves, one of the best ways I think to understand the dwarves is, you imagine, so Snow White, obviously she reaches her teenage period. That's what's happening, right? She is entering puberty. She's being transformed. All of a sudden she becomes a threat to the woman, to the mother. All of a sudden this young girl now is becoming a woman. She's beautiful. And so she gets cast into the forest, and she deals with, you could say, the problems of femininity at the outset. She deals with the problems of puberty and not the solution to it. And so she has to learn to work. She has to learn to clean the house. She has all this kind of annoying parts of what the female role was traditionally. And then also she's surrounded by these idiosyncratic men that are all, that are just like little men that aren't really men. They can't really be her priest. They can't be her prince. They're just, and Disney gets that right too. It's like all these weird aspects of manliness, like Sneezy and Doc, and kind of dopey guy. And let's say the fragmented masculinity.
Excellent.
And then what she has to find is ultimately her mate. She has to find her prince, the one that can show her what this transformation is for, right? Which is ultimately to be married and to have children, right? That's what puberty is leading towards, is fertility and the capacity to engage in sexual union. And so that's a good way. And so that's a dark time, right? She goes into the forest. She has to, like I said, she has to learn to work. She feels like she's in a stranger's house, right? She's not at home with herself, with her situation, and she has to kind of get through that in order to find a new home. And in some way she has to die. It's also part of the menstrual cycle, like the monthly menstrual cycle. There's like a little death and then a rebirth at every cycle.
Cool.
So that's a little image of that.
Yeah.
But in terms of the apple, it really has to do with Adam and Eve. It really is a play on the story of Adam and Eve, and the problem of beauty, the problem of supplement. Right. So in the story of Snow White, the original, in the Grimm's version, for example, the queen goes to see Snow White 3 times. So the first time she brings her a decorative comb, and the second time she brings her like a corset or like a belt or something. And it's very mysterious because you think, isn't Snow White the most beautiful girl of all? So why is she trying to give her things to supplement her beauty? Right? Why is he trying to put makeup on the most beautiful girl in the world? And that's the mystery of beauty, right? The weaponized beauty, or the artificial beauty versus true beauty. And that has to do with self-consciousness of beauty, right? When someone becomes self-conscious of their beauty, then they're capable of weaponizing it to manipulate others. And that's what she's trying to do. She's trying to kill her by making her self-conscious of her beauty, so that she then can become like her, basically, become like the queen, which is a weaponized beauty. And the apple, ultimately, that's what it is. It's in the original version, it says that the apple was polished smooth like a mirror, right? That's the mirror. That's the queen's mirror. The queen's mirror is not a magic mirror, really. It's just a mirror. It's self-conscious beauty. It's the capacity to see yourself from the outside, to judge yourself in terms of your beauty. And that makes it, that's what makes you put on makeup, let's say.
Yeah.
So that's what's going on in that story.
Yeah.
Make you self-conscious of your beauty, and that will destroy it or kill you.
And the primary relationship is the relationship with the self, that the self has replaced God. Your primary relationship with the external world is a replication, a reciprocal relationship with the self. The self has become the deity. That's cool. That's really cool analysis. So is that the function of the apple then in Genesis?
It has to do with knowledge. I think that's what it is. I'm pretty sure, because in the biblical story, it has to do with knowledge, which leads to self-consciousness, right? So Adam eats the apple, and then he feels naked, and now he has to cover himself. In the Snow White story, it's kind of reversed, where the queen is enticing her to cover herself, enticing her to put something out there, right? To put on the decorative comb, to wear a corset, to enhance her beauty. In Adam and Eve story, it happens in reverse, where they eat the apple first and then they want to cover themselves, but it's still the same structure. If you see it, if you see it from outside, you can see how it's the same pattern, and it has to do with self-consciousness, the problem of self-consciousness.
Yes, and objective.
So in our version of Snow White, for example, we have her holding a hand mirror, and it's a phone. Like she's just holding a phone. You can see it in the image, right? She's holding this hand mirror and looking at herself, and it's like that reflection, and that those likes and those comments that make us feel like we have worth, external validation.
Also, as a paradigm, they're both about objectification and materialization, i.e. the ineffable made objectified. When it remains ineffable, it remains in the territory of divinity. It's still sublimated. Once it's objectified, then it's, you've just cast more territory into, you've given yet more unto Caesar. Why do you think that more female-centric folk tales have succeeded than you have to dig around for male fairy tales? Do you think it's because there's customarily more pressure on females to socially conform because of the sort of biological challenges that females traditionally and more generally have? Why would that be? Would it be because
why are there more? I mean, I think that for sure that there's when girls hit puberty, they have to deal with it, like in a way more than guys. Like guys, we have to deal with it too, but there's a reality to transformation which is way more risky for girls than it is for men. It's like you can get pregnant, that's a big deal. That'll change everything in your life. And so I think for sure the fact that a lot of these stories have to do with the transformation and kind of learning about this transformation are part of our let's say the fairy tales that have risen to the surface in the modern world. But there are a lot of fairy tales that also have male characters. They're just a little less known in the modern world for some reason. But we have Jack and the Beanstalk. That's part of the series. I have the Valiant Little Tailor. We're gonna have different versions of those more male-led fairy tales as well.